Huh, I wonder what that noise was. Oh, not again. Hey everyone, I just played The Rise of the Golden Idol, and it was good? I think I liked it? I honestly don't know. Developed by Color Grey Games, The Rise of the Golden Idol is a point-and-click mystery game that throws you into an alternate 1970s to unravel a conspiracy of corporate idiocy, utopian ideals, and ancient technology repurposed for the needs of the modern consumer. It is also a sequel to 2022's The Case of the Golden Idol, a game that I loved, though the original is not something you need to play in order to understand or enjoy Rise. As the game's own store page states, quote, "The world has changed, the sins of humanity have not," end quote. So let's talk about it. But before I get my hands into the guts of this game, I've made 2 other videos about this series, and this video is going to act as though you've seen them. So if you haven't, I'd highly encourage you to do so. Also, there are going to be mild mechanical spoilers throughout the video. I'll put an actual spoiler break for when we get into the juicier details of the plot, though only for Rise, because it will be impossible to talk about this game without spoiling some narrative beats from Case. Case in point, at the end of that game, the titular idol was destroyed with cannon fire. Oops. And finally, this video and everything I make on the channel is now made possible by the people generously supporting me on Patreon, so if you like what I do, please consider donating. And if you don't want to give money to Patreon, or can't support monthly, Ko-Fi is also an option. Links are in the description. And if financial support isn't an option but you still want to help the channel grow, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and share it around because YouTube definitely won't. Anyway, let's get to it. This is The Rise of the Golden Idol. The game picks up almost 200 years after the events of Case of the Golden Idol. The 1790s have passed out of living memory. Lazarus Hearst and his attempts to bring about his idea of utopia are nothing but a historical footnote, and the legends that he used a magical idol to achieve his goals are just that. Legends. The world has moved on from such ridiculous superstitions. The world has moved on from Albion too. It's the allied states of Hesperia that run things now. And it operates on a different kind of superstition, capitalism. But while the idol may be forgotten, it's not entirely gone. Bodies are piling up with eyes turned to ruby red gems, and strange experiments are taking place under the roof of the OPIG research lab. The world may not be ready for what comes next, but at least it'll have you as a witness. It's not just the world that's changed since the Case of the Golden Idol. Rise features a huge mechanical overhaul that completely changes the way the game is played. You're still a very nosy ghost rifling through pockets and drawers, sticking your face where it doesn't belong, and the general underlying gameplay loop of dragging words into blank spaces to fill up a paragraph and solve a crime remains. But otherwise, things are completely different. Gone is the single thinking panel you toggle open with the tap of a button. Now each case comes with 2 or 3 or 4 or more purpose-built puzzle boxes to solve. Gone is the nice neat word bag at the bottom of the screen. Now it has its own box. Gone is the need to peruse each scene and individual and document for every pertinent word. Now the game offers them up for free the first time you interact with an important object. At least the different colours for nouns and verbs and adjectives remain. I completely understand why these changes were made. Even the Case of the Golden Idol was starting to chafe against the limitations of the original design by the end of its final DLC pack, but there was something so smooth and satisfying to it that Rise, with all its added complexity, simply can't match. Don't get me wrong, I love that the separate boxes allow for more variety and complexity in the puzzle design. I love how you only unlock certain panels after solving specific bits of each case, or uncovering a separate area of the environment, but it's clunky. Playing Case felt like driving a race car stripped down to only the most necessary parts, but Rise feels more like an old VW bus. It's still reliable once you get the engine running, but it's bigger, slower, and far less flashy a vehicle. You can still toggle the investigation boxes with the touch of a button, but the result is often a messy overlapping stack of windows that just gets in the way. They they might obscure information you're trying to double check around the environment, or the word window, or the wrong box might open because you hit the spacebar, which toggles every active panel, instead of the individual button at the bottom of the screen, which only opens or closes one. It's not bad, it's just 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or at least it was for me, though the new way words are collected is more like 1 step forward, 2 steps back, like if that old VW bus kept dropping its back bumper every 100 kilometers or so. Again, I understand why the changes were made. There are only so many ways to slip relevant words into an environment, especially when some cases can run you upwards of 50. There were even 1 or 2 instances in Rise where the game just gave out words without placing them around the environment at all, for the sake of streamlining the puzzle-solving process, and fair enough, there were times when that felt contrived back in Case, but just giving the words to you I think was a mistake. There were times in Case where searching out each important word could get tedious, but it did make you pay attention. The act of searching out the words, however many there were, always took you through each bit of relevant information for the case, to the point that by the time you had them all, you usually also had enough understanding of the scenario to successfully fill in the blanks and solve it. There was only one exception to that in my experience. I still, to this day, do not understand how you're meant to solve the 9th scenario in Case, but otherwise the game did a great job of keeping the player's attention on what's important. By contrast, Rise doesn't even really try. Handing out the words with a single click doesn't incentivize closer examination of each scenario's environment, and once you have them all, it's a lot easier to just brute force the puzzle windows by using context clues and surface level glances around the area, especially when you consider how the blank spaces are still color coded to indicate what kind of word the game wants from you, and it'll still tell you when you've only got 2 or fewer mistakes to fix in each panel as well. Rise might feature more mechanical complexity and variety than Case, but the major changes to the gameplay loop have rendered it less engaging an experience overall, and for a game as long as Rise of the Golden Idol is, a lack of mechanical engagement is a real problem. Actually, long is not the right word. Bloated is how I'd describe Rise of the Golden Idol overall. The game features 20 scenarios to solve, more than Case and its 2 DLC packs combined, and my first playthrough took a whopping 9 hours to complete compared to the original's paltry 4. But Case of the Golden Idol had no fat to trim. Every single scenario advanced the plot, added twists and turns, presented striking images, brought something absolutely necessary to the experience, and the same was true of the DLC. By contrast, I can think of 3, maybe 4 scenarios from Rise of the Golden Idol that could either be folded into neighbouring levels or cut entirely, and that includes my favourite scenario in the aviary. That is not a bird, that is a dinosaur. Anyway, let's put a pin in that for now, because I'm still not done with the gameplay. To ease off the game a little for a moment, one mechanical addition I really love is the fact you can switch between scenarios at any time from a menu built into the HUD, which is a real lifesaver because there are now puzzle panels that carry across entire chapters of the game, except when they don't. The closest thing I can compare these chapter-wide puzzles to is a boss fight. These things do not mess about. You might be able to brute force each individual scenario with a surface level squiz, but not these bad boys. They demand your attention. This is the sort of mechanical escalation that I was expecting from Rise, and I wasn't disappointed. These things are great. Their presence did bring into focus how underutilized a lot of the other new additions felt though. One of the best things the Lemurian Vampire DLC pack brought to the Idol gameplay formula was the ability to switch between different time periods for each scenario, and while I was happy to find the mechanic did return for Rise, it was only once or twice, and never with the complexity of the DLC levels that first featured it. The auction came the closest. Having to figure out what each attendee bought based on how much money they had and where they moved to between the bidding process and the after party was great, but it didn't didn't match the intensity or complexity of solving Prince Tisa's murder from the Lemurian vampire. There's another scenario in Rise where you have to interpret a dance, and that was great too, but it's not exactly challenging. Aside from the chapter-wide puzzles, not much of the Rise of the Golden Idol is, and I think that's where a lot of my disappointment with the game comes from. I went into Rise of the Golden Idol expecting the same escalation of mechanics and difficulty as there was between the Case of the Golden Idol and its DLC packs, but the sequel might be the least challenging entry of the whole series. And for newcomers who never played Case, that's fine, but as a returning fan, I was expecting more. I wasn't bothered at the simplicity of the early scenarios, but I kept waiting for the game to go all out in terms of complexity, and it just never really did. There were one or two exceptions. This case at the docks was an absolute bastard in the best way. So was this scenario at a housing tenement, but they were exceptions. The vast majority of the game was a soft case to crack, soft like the shell of a scrumptious Cadbury chocolate egg. I'm not even going to look up if they're a shitty company, we already know the answer. The game looks good at least. The Case of the Golden Idol had a visual style that was halfway between pixel art and 18th century landscape, but Rise swaps it all out in favour of something that looks more like a modern painting. The strange political cartoon proportions of the character designs remain, but they're a lot less crunchy than they used to be, and given the 180-year time skip between the two games, the updated art style almost feels like a reflection of the technological progress the world has gone through. The little loops of motion and action remain too, and I'm happy to say this is one area where Rise does improve on what came before. There's a very clear shift in the art design between the Case of the Golden Idol and its DLC packs, now looking at them both with the benefit of hindsight. The environments might still be pixelated, but the character models from the DLCs were made in the style of Rise's NPCs, then crunched up a bit in post, and the end result always looked a bit wrong to me. The animations in the DLCs were too fast, too jerky, too over the top, but Rise reins them in to something smoother and more pleasing to the eye. Which is not to say there aren't still moments of chaos and action. There are, and the game is great at communicating them too. I love the way this security guard shakes after getting stabbed, for example. Even something as simple as the way people open their mouths, and the speed at which their lips flap, conveys so much about what they're saying and how they're saying it. It makes the world come alive, makes it feel real, even if you're only getting a tiny slice of it. The world itself is really the star this time around. There's so much detail put into each scenario to convey how the world has changed from Case, and how it differs from our own version of the 1970s too. The cars with 6 wheels, the ornithopters whirling through the sky, the TV cameras that look like they were designed and manufactured in Mordor, the fucking dinosaurs hanging out in the aviary. Did I mention this game has dinosaurs? It's like they made this scenario specifically just for me. They're all subtle differences, but they add up to create an impression of a world that is so familiar while being very strange at the same time. And that's before you even consider all the crazy tech the ancient Lemurians had lying around. One visit to the museum makes it clear the Golden Idol was the least of their technological wonders. Wait, is that? The cutscenes are a huge improvement over the Case of the Golden Idol too. They appear to be in-engine rather than pre-recorded this time around. They have a much better flow to them, they don't have any weird voice acting. They're just integrated much better into the game. As for the sound, it's more of a mixed bag. The clicks and pops and swishes that play whenever you move words around give the puzzle solving a tactile quality and don't overwhelm the soundscape. There's nothing better than the jingle that plays whenever you complete one of the puzzle boxes, or the audible sharpness of each word once you crack a whole scenario. Though the chime that plays whenever you unlock a new section of the puzzle does get a little annoying because it never goes away. If you're focused on reading something and happen to unlock a new puzzle box, you'll have to toggle it once to make the sound stop. I think the little sparkly graphic and a brief jingle would have been enough to convey that something new had unlocked, though the sound is hardly overwhelming, so this is really just a nitpick. I have more of an issue with the music. It's not bad. In fact, it can be quite good at times. It's a very synth-heavy score. In fact, it treads closer to cyberpunk than mystery. There are some great tracks that feel purpose-built to get you engaged with the mystery you're trying to solve. And some fun, energetic beats that convey the hustle and bustle of the time period. But those are the exceptions rather than the rule, and often don't last particularly long. Each scenario will usually start off with a burst of musical intensity, but then it'll settle down into something a little more pensive. At least that I think was the intent, but for me, most of the tracks just faded into the background. I understand not wanting to overwhelm the player with some drum and bass while they're trying to solve a puzzle, but Kyle Misko's score for Case and its DLC packs managed to thread the needle between thoughtful and intense, and they were so unique. Paul Alexander's soundtrack for Rise isn't bad, but I don't think it's very special either. I can't imagine myself listening to it again while writing, the way I am listening to the soundtrack of the Lemurian Vampire right now as I bash out this script. The best way I can describe Rise's soundtrack is that it lacks punch. Take, for example, the opening moments of each game. Case throws you right off a cliff into the middle of things, and the music matches the tone. While Rise just misses the mark in my opinion. At least the occasional undercurrent of ambient noise returns, like the wail of a siren after this prison break. Speaking of pulled punches, let's talk about the story. Once again, it's a study in contrasts. There were scenarios in Rise of the Golden Idol that made me go, oh shit, at the implications of where the story was going, that were just as effective as the big twists from Case. But then there were other moments where I was left scratching my head, wondering what the scenario had to do with anything. Admittedly, the game successfully had me saying, there's no way this is important, on almost every single level, and most of the time it had pleasantly surprised me with a sudden story connection that would only come to light at the very end of the scenario. But as I mentioned earlier, there are still 3 or 4 levels in the game that I really don't think needed to be there, and that includes the opening Case. Constriction isn't necessarily a bad scene to open on, but it's the wrong scene to open on for Rise of the Golden Idol. The first scenario of Chapter 1 fits much better because it ultimately has so much more narrative weight. Given Rise of the Golden Idol is much more of a slow burn story, it would make a nice contrast to the opening scenario of Case too. That game opened on a man getting pushed off a cliff to his death, a second of chaos after a spur-of-the-moment decision, while Rise would begin in a moment of calm, after all the action has already happened, with a body being discovered having fallen from a fatal height. Either way, at times it feels like Rise is taking things a little too slow. Chapter 4 especially felt like one big speed bump right when the narrative momentum should have been ramping up toward a climax, and again, that would mean losing my favourite scenario in the whole game. Case, by contrast, had no such filler. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind a slow burn story. I mean, a VW bus isn't going to fly down the road like a race car, but it will still get you to your destination, as long as it's been properly maintained. My point is, Rise is so slow and keeps the stakes so low. It drags out plot beats and big twists over so many scenarios that it just feels bloated. There are plot beats that the game stretches across 3 or 4 scenarios that Case would have blazed through in one, with much higher stakes overall too. I think I would have preferred a really tight, really complex 15 scenarios to the 20-odd slog Rise of the Golden Idol ultimately is. Length and pacing are hardly my only issues with Rise's story. The way it's told is a huge sticking point as well. So much of Rise of the Golden Idol is told out of order. The game's opening act starts in media res before Chapter 2 onward flashes back to explain how things got to that point, which I don't have a problem with. But often the individual cases within each chapter are told out of order as well. It's like if you took the back of the VW bus and put it on the front of the vehicle, and then you switched over all the doors with the windows and turned the chairs backwards, and you know what, I feel like this metaphor's getting away from me, let's move on. I don't really have anything particularly against stories being told in anachronic order. Movies like Memento use the style to great effect, but in Rise of the Golden Idol's case, it feels less like it's what's best for the plot, and more like an attempt to make the narrative seem more complex than it actually is. Which feels very weird to say, because thematically, the anachronic order is quite appropriate to Rise of the Golden Idol, but there it is. That's right. The Rise of the Golden Idol is the Beyond Two Souls of indie games. Well, maybe that's a bit too mean, but you get the idea. There are other things I could point to about Rise of the Golden Idol that left me a little deflated as well. The fact that not every scenario is based around solving a murder is a big one. The 1970s setting, while a fun-in version of the 1790s of Case, just didn't grab me given its comparatively well-trod ground. And that's despite all the things I mentioned earlier that make it interesting. The sprawling cast is another. There are so many characters, most of them one-offs like Jeremy's Honker and Porbo and Jim Horny. That's not a joke, and very few end up with a satisfying arc by the time you reach the credits. But the fact so much is left hanging by the final scenario is really what frustrates me the most. The Case of the Golden Idol left a lot up in the air as well, but it at least resolved every plot thread of the main conflict. Every single character got what they deserved. It didn't leave blank spaces on the board with the explicit intent of filling them later in DLC chapters, which seems to be the case with people in Rise like Roy Sampson and Mumati De Silva. That I've spoken so much about the storytelling devices in play rather than the story itself, I think is indicative of the underlying problems with Rise of the Golden Idol's plot, but I can sum the whole issue up much more succinctly. Taken on its own, Rise of the Golden Idol is not a bad story, but it lacks what made Case of the Golden Idol such a breath of fresh air. Rise lacks the high stakes and the unique historical setting, and even the titular idol itself. The thing was present in every scenario of Case, to the point it was the closest thing that game had to a proper protagonist. But Rise just lacks the same sort of tight narrative focus. There's no connective tissue holding the game's multiple narratives together, not even really to the first game. As with the mechanical complexity, I kept waiting for some element of Case to emerge, be it a returning character who'd somehow survived to the present day, or an unexpected modernized reimagining of some bit of visual design. And the game kept teasing me with ways it could have taken such a route, but it ultimately never did. Even the idol, when it does finally re-emerge, looks completely different, and never really comes to resemble its original design, despite the fact it's featured on the game's program icons. It's just too big a leap from what came before, too disconnected from what made the original entry so compelling, like the differences between Seasons 1 and 2 of True Detective, or Seasons 2 and 3 of Westworld, that the other things I felt were lacking in terms of plot, or mechanics, or presentation stand out as worse by comparison. Rise of the Golden Idol might be a good game. The positive response speaks to its good quality, but in my opinion, it's not a very good sequel. And to explain why in detail, I'm going to need to get into spoilers. So if you don't want to learn the dark secrets going on behind closed doors at the OPIG Research Lab or the Harmony Foundation, go to here. I've said before that Rise of the Golden Idol is a study in contrasts, so here's a few more. The original idol featured in Case was a small handheld antique that looked genuinely alien. The IDOL present in Rise is a massive science fiction supercomputer that can't be moved without a team of porters and a trolley. Lazarus Hurst used the idol in Case to literally physically steal the years from his enemies and give them to himself and his allies. In Rise, the team at OPIG discover how to use the idol to take people's memories and pass them on to others. How much time is taken depends on the lens placed inside the machine. It can be as little as a minute or as long as a month, but even just shifting around a few days worth of memories can result in disaster. OPIG will take anyone wanting to make a quick buck in as a test subject, and New Wells is overflowing with people in need of some extra cash, but they never bother to explain what exactly it is they're doing to the ones who do show up. A piece of shit landlord forgets he was threatened with violence if he didn't stop acting like a creep toward the women tenants, and ends up shot to death when he starts acting up again before another resident, who also participated in OPIG's tests and received his memories, can explain the situation to everyone in the building. Actually, this guy was such a scumbag that him getting shot to death isn't that much of a disaster. Let's try a different scenario. A guy forgets to turn off the heat lamps in an incubator at the aviary, so a bird dies? That's kind of a disaster, I guess. A guy wins a talent show with a sick dance and one of the other contestants throws a tantrum. This whole situation takes up 2 whole scenarios, by the way. You see what I mean about the game having low stakes? Wait, I've got it. OPIG's research leads to underage drinking. Shut it down. Okay, OPIG's tests aren't that much of a shit show, but the office politics going on behind closed doors absolutely are. The Idol project is being run by Eugene Marmot, the kind of insufferable office fuckwit who is just good enough at networking to fail upward into a management position. Nobody likes him, but he's on good terms with Nathan Hoyle, the guy who runs OPIG, so he stays. And so does Tessa Nevery, a hippie historian and founder of the Harmony Foundation, an offshoot of OPIG that hemorrhaged grant money researching New Age spiritual bullshit. She might seem eccentric, but it was her who actually tracked down all of the pieces of the original Golden Idol. She was even willing to kill to get them. And while she got just about everything wrong, she got just enough about the idol right to pique OPIG's interest. The company let her go once the cost of funding the Harmony Foundation's pseudoscience became too great to ignore, and boy has she been making it hard for them ever since. But once Eugene gets put in charge of the Idol project, she ends up brought back into the fold as a consultant. Eugene replaced Marie Westlake as the leader of the Idol project. Marie is a much better scientist, but a far worse people person. She's constantly butting heads with OPIG's upper management, especially Tim Spender, and even when she was in charge, she took things too slow for Jack Nowak's liking. Auriel Toussaint, professor of ancient Lemurian archaeology, just seems happy to be here. It is an absolute clusterfuck from top to bottom, but things get much worse when OPIG discovers the idol can project memories through live television broadcasts, and And hey, that Pale Championship everyone's been talking about the whole game is coming up. Imagine the commercial potential. This is one of those moments that made me go, oh shit, once I realized what the story was setting up. Just record the memories of some models on a beach drinking O-Pig's beverage sponsor of choice, Orange, while high as a kite on Euphoria, and then broadcast it at the Pale Final halftime show to the millions of spectators all over the world. Everyone gets the amped up memories of drinking Orange while high, and sales skyrocket overnight. It's such a mundane and corporate yet unethical and evil way to use the idol's memory shifting capabilities. I fucking love it. Eugene really outdid himself this time. There were only 2 other moments in the game that left me with the same hollow feeling, and the first is this response from a literary agent to one of the characters. And that's not a joke, by the way. 7 years of this shit and I'm traumatized. I wrote that as a gag, by the way, but while making this video, I actually got another rejection email for something I sent off 10 months ago. Something that I'd already assumed had been rejected. And you know what? It still fucking hurt. Please send help, or at least some feedback. Anything, I'm begging you. But the other is from the scenario where Jack and Oriel start experimenting with the memories contained in ancient Lemurian discs. Oriel wants more than the month's worth maximum the idol can offer with only 1 lens installed. So Jack puts them all in together. He thinks it'll just add the 4 different time frames together. Instead, it multiplies them, and when he uses the idol on Oriel, it basically kills him. Overwrites him completely with the personality stored on the disc. It's such a great holy shit reveal, and the way the 2 discoveries collide in the final clash is really fun, if a little flaccid compared to Case's endgame. But Oriel's transformation into Echo Seconda never really comes to anything. Not to say he isn't present, he's right there watching the whole finale play out. The whole time I was playing the game, I kept waiting for the guy in the red jacket on the main menu to factor into things somehow, and I wasn't disappointed, but he doesn't actually do anything, which is why I think Constriction is a bad choice of prologue compared to Academic Impact, the first proper scenario, to say nothing about the victims of the Red Curse, an aspect of the plot that I've completely forgotten to mention throughout most of this video, which accurately reflects how Rise of the Golden Idol mostly forgets about it too. It's front and center in Chapter 1, but doesn't return until the penultimate scenario of the whole game, and while chronologically the 2 happen very close together, the way the rest of the story is told out of order makes it feel like the developers wanted it to slip your mind just to make it harder to put its surprisingly simple solution together. Like Lazarus Hearst and Lavu Mata before him, Jack Nowak thinks he knows how to make the world a better place using the idol's magical powers. Eugene's commercial plans for the device already loaded the gun and pointed it at millions of people. All Jack needs to do is swap out the bullet and his dreams of utopia are assured, though the 2 of them are hardly the only ones with their sights set on using the idol during the Pale Final. But I'll leave that final mystery up for you to discover yourself. At the end of my last Idol video, I said that after the stumbles of the DLC, I didn't want to see the sequel follow through with a fall. It's only coincidence that the sequel ended up with the name Rise of the Golden Idol, but I'm sorry to say I think my worries proved true. The Rise of the Golden Idol is not a bad game. A lot of people seem to really like it. I even got a comment on the last video I made about the series saying they love it more than the original, but for me, it just fell short. It's such a departure from what came before, and so focused on setting things up for its whopping 4 planned DLC packs scheduled for release across 2025, that it never really feels like a proper continuation, nor a satisfying standalone. Reading through the DLC roadmap, I find myself more interested in what they've got planned for the expansions than what was in the main game itself, though a pack based around Lemuria in its golden age is a dangerous proposition, but I think that's a discussion for another video. As it stands, the game is just an overly long, overly complicated slog. When I finished the Case of the Golden Idol, I was left wanting more, while Rise of the Golden Idol left me overstuffed and ready to leave. Thanks for watching. And that's the video. Before I go, I'd like to thank by name. There's a spider moving up on the ceiling. Shit. Okay, it's dealt with. Before I go, I'd like to thank by name the people supporting me with $5 US a month or more on Patreon. Azazel, Cass, Hawkwing2652, Hey Matey, Jeffiet, Marcy May, Dog, Sarah Bloomer, Sneezy McGlassface, Space Quest Historian, This Sauerkraut, and Zeke the Phantom. Thank you so much. And shout out to everyone who's supporting at less than $5 a month or given one-off donations on Ko-Fi. You know who you are. I've got nothing really to say at the end of this one, so thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Being a bird keeper is hard. You will have no feathered friends.